They invited Ethan to meet a woman he'd never seen before. What neither of them knew was that several coworkers were standing nearby waiting for the moment everything went wrong. They thought they were creating the perfect joke. Instead, they accidentally changed two lives forever. Because the woman they treated like part of a prank would soon teach Ethan something he had forgotten years ago. And when she finally learned why that first meeting happened, everything nearly fell apart. A cool autumn breeze drifted through downtown Denver as gray clouds rolled slowly across the sky. The city felt busy as always, but for Ethan Brooks, it was just another Saturday he had never planned to spend with strangers. At 31 years old, Ethan Brooks had become the kind of man people often misunderstood. Standing just over 6 feet tall, he had broad shoulders, sharp jawlines, dark brown hair kept neatly trimmed, and a short beard that gave him a permanently serious appearance. His steel gray eyes rarely revealed what he was thinking. Most people at work described him as distant, cold, or even arrogant. The truth was far more complicated. For years earlier, Ethan had joined one of Denver's largest logistics companies and quickly worked his way into an operations management position. He was reliable, organized, and respected by senior leadership. Yet outside of work, he kept almost everyone at arm's length. Years ago, a close friend he trusted had betrayed him during a difficult period in his life, using personal information against him for professional gain. Since then, Ethan had built invisible walls around himself. Work stayed at work. Personal life stayed private. That was why he was surprised when Megan Foster appeared at his desk on Friday afternoon. Megan was 28, energetic, and impossible to ignore. Her curly blonde hair framed a cheerful face that always seemed ready to smile. She worked in human resources and had made it her unofficial mission to drag quiet employees into social activities. Unlike others, she wasn't malicious. She genuinely believed people were happier when they connected with others. "You need to get out of your apartment this weekend," Megan said while leaning against his desk. Ethan barely looked up from his laptop. "I was planning to enjoy the silence." "That's exactly the problem." He sighed. Megan grinned. "There's a community center downtown that needs volunteers for an art program tomorrow. Just a few hours. Help organize supplies. Nothing dramatic. I'm not exactly an art expert." "You don't need to be. I'll think about it." "That means yes." Before Ethan could object, she walked away. The next morning, he found himself driving toward the community center while questioning every decision that had led him there. The building sat in an older neighborhood near downtown. It wasn't large, but it was welcoming. Murals covered the outer walls, and colorful flowers lined the entrance despite the season. Inside, laughter echoed through the halls. Children and adults moved between classrooms carrying paintbrushes, sketchbooks, and art supplies. Volunteers prepared tables while instructors arranged projects for the afternoon. Ethan immediately felt out of place. Then he saw her. Near the center of a large art room sat a young woman speaking with several students. Ava Collins looked to be around 27 years old. She had shoulder-length chestnut hair that curled softly near the ends and warm hazel eyes that seemed to notice everything around her. Her skin carried a natural glow, and her smile appeared effortless rather than practiced. She sat in a sleek black wheelchair, moving through the room with confidence and familiarity. What caught Ethan's attention wasn't the wheelchair. It was the way everyone reacted to her. People listened when she spoke. Students gravitated toward her naturally. Even nervous newcomers seemed to relax around her. There was a calm strength about her that was difficult to explain. As Ethan approached, Ava looked up. "You must be Ethan." Her voice was warm. "You know my name?" "Megan talks." Ethan groaned internally. That made Ava laugh. "I've heard you're dependable." "That's a polite way of saying boring." "Good," Ava replied. "Reliable people are useful around here." The conversation immediately felt easier than Ethan expected. Ava introduced him to the volunteers and quickly put him to work helping organize supplies for an afternoon workshop. Together, they carried canvases, sorted paints, arranged tables, and prepared materials for dozens of participants. Hours passed surprisingly fast. As they worked, Ethan learned that Ava had been teaching community art classes for several years. When he eventually asked about the wheelchair, she answered without hesitation. A serious car accident had changed her life 6 years earlier. The injury ended many of her plans and forced her to rebuild nearly everything from the beginning. What surprised Ethan was the absence of bitterness in her voice. She didn't tell the story like a tragedy. She told it like a chapter she had survived. "You don't seem angry," Ethan said carefully. "I was," Ava admitted. "For a long time." Her eyes drifted toward the windows. "Eventually, I realized anger wasn't helping me move forward." Something about that answer stayed with him. Most people spent years carrying old wounds. Ethan certainly had. Yet Ava spoke about hers differently. The afternoon continued with painting lessons, laughter, and small conversations between projects. At one point, Ethan found himself laughing harder than he had in months after Ava joked about one of her clients wanting a logo redesign for the 7th time. By late afternoon, sunlight began fading behind the clouds. Students slowly packed up their projects and headed home. The room finally grew quiet. For a moment, Ethan and Ava stood, or rather sat and stood, near one of the windows overlooking the street. Neither seemed eager to leave. What Ethan didn't know was that several blocks away, a group of coworkers exchanged amused text messages. Some of them had been watching the day unfold exactly as they had planned. They expected awkwardness, embarrassment, discomfort. Instead, they were witnessing something entirely different. And none of them yet realized how much damage their little joke was about to cause. The following Thursday arrived with clear skies over Denver, and for the first time in years, Ethan Brooks found himself checking his phone more often than necessary. He told himself he was simply confirming the time of his meeting, but deep down he knew that wasn't true. Since volunteering at the community center, thoughts of Ava Collins had quietly followed him through meetings, commutes, and long evenings alone in his apartment. After several days of hesitation, Ethan had finally sent her a message. He thanked her for letting him help with the workshop and casually suggested meeting for coffee sometime. To his surprise, Ava replied less than 20 minutes later. Now he stood outside a small cafe in Denver's historic Lodo district. When Ava arrived, she wore a dark green sweater beneath a light denim jacket. Her chestnut hair rested naturally against her shoulders, and her warm hazel eyes carried the same calm confidence Ethan remembered. She maneuvered her wheelchair smoothly through the crowded sidewalk, drawing occasional glances from strangers, though she seemed completely unaware of them. Their conversation resumed as if only minutes had passed since the community center. What began as coffee turned into nearly 3 hours. Over the next several weeks, that pattern continued. Sometimes they met at quiet cafes hidden between old brick buildings. Other times they explored local art exhibitions or spent afternoons wandering through Denver's historic neighborhoods. During one gallery visit, Ethan discovered another side of Ava's past. They stood before a series of mountain landscape paintings when Ava smiled at one particular canvas. "I used to climb mountains like that," she said. Ethan looked at her with surprise. Ava laughed softly. Before the accident, she had been a competitive rock climber. She spent nearly every weekend exploring trails throughout Colorado. She loved the feeling of standing above the clouds after hours of climbing. The accident that changed her life had happened during a winter drive home from a climbing trip. For a brief moment, Ethan saw sadness pass through her eyes. Not bitterness, not regret, just the memory of something deeply loved. What impressed him most was how she spoke about those years. She never asked for sympathy. She never described herself as a victim. Instead, she focused on everything she had learned after losing the life she once expected. Ava admitted that rebuilding her confidence had taken years. Many people treated her differently after the accident. Some assumed she constantly needed help. Others spoke to her with forced kindness that felt more like pity. A few stopped seeing her altogether and only saw the wheelchair. Then she glanced toward Ethan. "You never do that." Ethan frowned. "Do what?" "Treat me like I'm fragile." The comment caught him off guard. He had never thought about it. To him, Ava was simply Ava. The woman with the sharp sense of humor, the endless patience for students, and the stubborn determination to keep moving forward no matter what life placed in front of her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence felt comfortable. As the weeks passed, Ava learned more about Ethan as well. One evening, while sitting outside a bookstore cafe, she finally asked why he kept so much distance between himself and other people. The question lingered between them. Most people accepted Ethan's silence without challenging it. Ava never seemed interested in easy answers. After a long pause, Ethan told her the truth. Years earlier, a colleague he considered a close friend had betrayed his trust. Personal conversations Ethan believed were private eventually became office gossip and were later used against him during an important promotion opportunity. The experience left scars deeper than he usually admitted. Since then, keeping people at a distance felt safer. Ava listened carefully without interrupting. When he finished, she simply nodded. No wonder you built walls. Ethan expected advice. Instead, Ava offered understanding. That simple response affected him more than any motivational speech could have. For perhaps the first time in years, Ethan felt genuinely understood. Gradually, their friendship deepened. They exchanged messages throughout the week. They shared stories about work frustrations, favorite books, and childhood memories. The more time Ethan spent with Ava, the more he noticed how differently she viewed the world. Where he saw risks, she often saw possibilities. Where he expected disappointment, she searched for opportunities. Her optimism wasn't naive. It had been earned through struggle. One evening, after leaving another art exhibition, Ethan realized something that surprised him. For weeks, he had looked forward to every conversation with Ava. And for the first time in a very long time, the walls he had spent years building no longer felt quite as necessary. Winter was slowly approaching Denver when Ethan Brooks began noticing small things that felt out of place. The city continued moving as usual. People hurried through crowded sidewalks, and work remained as demanding as ever. Yet something about the way a few coworkers looked at him had started to bother him. For nearly 2 months, Ethan and Ava Collins had developed a friendship that had become one of the most important parts of his life. They met regularly, exchanged messages almost every day, and had built a level of trust that Ethan rarely gave anyone. That was why what happened on a Tuesday afternoon unsettled him so deeply. Ethan was leaving a conference room after a logistics planning meeting when he heard familiar voices coming from a nearby break room. At first, he paid little attention. Then he heard Ava's name. His footsteps slowed. The voices belonged to Megan Foster and 2 employees from another department. One of them was Tyler Reynolds, a tall man in his early 30s with sandy blonde hair, narrow blue eyes, and the casual confidence of someone who often mistook teasing for humor. Tyler was popular around the office, but his habit of turning people into jokes had occasionally earned him criticism. The second employee was Brandon Hayes, 29 years old, stocky, clean-shaven, and usually eager to impress whoever happened to be around him. Brandon rarely started trouble himself, but he often followed others into it. Ethan stopped before entering the room. "You should have seen his face that day," Tyler laughed. "I honestly thought he'd freeze up completely." Brandon chuckled. "I still can't believe he actually stayed." Megan sounded uncomfortable. "Maybe we shouldn't keep talking about it." Tyler ignored her. The whole point was to see how he'd react. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. Suddenly, pieces that never quite fit together began connecting. The volunteer invitation. Megan's unusual persistence. The strange way Ava somehow already knew his name. The fact that several coworkers seemed unusually interested in asking how the volunteer event had gone. Then Tyler laughed again. "We really thought he'd panic when he saw her." The words hit Ethan harder than he expected. Not because of what they said about him, because of what they revealed about Ava. For several seconds, he stood completely still. His mind replayed that first day at the community center. The conversations, the laughter, the growing friendship. Had all of it started because someone wanted entertainment? Ethan stepped into the room. The conversation stopped instantly. Tyler's smile disappeared. Brandon suddenly became very interested in his coffee cup. Megan looked as though she already knew what Ethan had heard. What exactly was supposed to be funny? Ethan asked. No one answered immediately. The silence stretched. Finally, Tyler shrugged. It wasn't a big deal. Ethan's jaw tightened. It sounds like it was. Tyler tried to laugh it off. We thought it would be awkward. That's all. The more Ethan listened, the angrier he became. Not because they expected him to feel uncomfortable. Not because they had turned him into a joke. What angered him was something far worse. They had turned Ava into part of the joke as well. A woman they barely knew. A woman who had already spent years dealing with assumptions and prejudice. Without her knowledge, they had used her circumstances for their own amusement. Ethan looked directly at Tyler. Did any of you stop and think about how she would feel if she knew? Tyler opened his mouth, but failed to answer. Brandon looked away. Even Megan lowered her eyes. Ethan continued. You weren't just making fun of me. The room remained silent. You used another person as entertainment. Nobody argued. Because nobody could. For the first time, Tyler looked genuinely ashamed. Megan finally spoke. I didn't think it would become this. Ethan believed her. But that didn't change what had happened. Without saying another word, he turned and walked away. The The rest of the day passed in a blur. He finished meetings, answered emails, reviewed reports, yet his thoughts remained fixed on Ava. By evening, he sat alone in his apartment staring out at the Denver skyline. Ava still didn't know. As far as she was concerned, their first meeting had been a simple coincidence. Part of Ethan wanted to tell her immediately. Another part feared what would happen if he did. What if she felt humiliated? What if she wanted nothing more to do with him after learning how everything began? For the first time since meeting her, Ethan questioned whether continuing their friendship might bring unnecessary pain into her life. The thought sat heavily in his chest long after the city lights appeared outside his window. And for the first time in weeks, he found himself unsure of what to do next. A cold wind swept through Denver as November settled over the city. The mountains in the distance wore fresh snow, and the evenings seemed to arrive earlier each day. For Ethan Brooks, however, the weather was not what occupied his mind. For nearly a week, he had carried the truth alone. Every message from Ava Collins made the weight heavier. Every conversation reminded him that she still didn't know how their story had begun. Several times he nearly told her. Several times he stopped himself. Fear had become a constant companion. Not fear for himself. Fear that once Ava learned the truth, she would look back on every memory they had created together and see only humiliation. Late Friday afternoon, Ethan finally sent a message asking if she was free the next day. Ava agreed immediately. They arranged to meet at a small cafe they had visited several times before. Saturday arrived gray and quiet. When Ethan entered the cafe, Ava was already there near the window. She wore a cream-colored sweater beneath a dark wool coat. Her chestnut hair framed her face softly, and her hazel eyes immediately noticed something was wrong. Normally, Ethan greeted her with a smile. Today, he seemed distracted, tense, almost exhausted. The moment he sat down, Ava tilted her head slightly. Something happened. It wasn't a question. Ethan looked down at his coffee. For a few seconds, he struggled to find the right words. Then he realized there weren't any. There was only the truth. Slowly, he explained everything. He told her about the conversation he overheard at work. He told her what Tyler and Brandon had admitted. He explained that Megan had known more than she originally revealed. Most importantly, he explained how the volunteer event had been arranged. Not because people genuinely thought they would connect, but because several co-workers wanted to watch his reaction. As Ethan spoke, Ava's expression gradually changed. The warmth in her face faded. Her eyes grew distant. She remained completely silent. For the first time since they met, Ethan couldn't tell what she was thinking. When he finally finished, neither of them spoke. The noise of the cafe seemed strangely loud. Dishes clattered. Coffee machines hissed. Conversations continued around them. Yet their table felt isolated from everything else. Several long minutes passed. Ava stared out the window. Ethan's stomach tightened. Part of him wondered if he had already lost her. Finally, she turned back toward him. I knew something felt strange. Her voice was calm. Too calm. Ethan frowned. Ava explained that during their first meeting, she had sensed small things that never quite made sense. The way Megan had been unusually vague. The way certain introductions felt forced. The way Ethan himself had occasionally seemed surprised by details everyone else supposedly knew. Still, she had never imagined the truth was this ugly. Ava looked down at her hands. For a moment, genuine hurt appeared on her face. Not because of Ethan, because of everyone else. For years, she had worked hard to build a life beyond her disability. She had fought to be seen as an artist, a teacher, a friend, a woman with dreams and ambitions. Learning that strangers had reduced her to part of a joke reopened wounds she thought had healed long ago. Ethan immediately regretted every second of hesitation. I'm sorry. The words escaped before he could stop them. Ava looked at him carefully. You didn't do this. I still should have told you sooner. That part was true. For several days, Ethan had seriously considered walking away. He admitted it. He confessed that he had thought about ending their friendship without explanation simply to avoid dragging her into workplace drama. As soon as the words left his mouth, he hated how they sounded. But Ava deserved honesty, even when it made him look weak. To his surprise, Ava didn't seem angry. Instead, she studied him quietly. Then she smiled. Not a large smile, just enough to soften the tension between them. That sounds exactly like something you would do. Ethan blinked. What does that mean? It means you overthink everything. For the first time that afternoon, he laughed. The sound felt strange after so much tension. Ava's expression grew serious again. What happened at the beginning matters. She paused. But it isn't the most important thing. Ethan listened carefully. The important part is what happened after. She reminded him of every conversation they had shared. Every afternoon spent exploring Denver. Every honest discussion about fear, loss, and rebuilding a life after disappointment. None of those moments had been fake. None of them had been planned. They belonged to them. Not to Megan. Not to Tyler. Not to anyone else. Ava reached across the table and placed her hand over Ethan's. The simple gesture carried more weight than any speech. I won't let someone else's cruelty decide what happens next. The tightness in Ethan's chest finally eased. For days he had feared this conversation. Now, sitting across from Ava, he realized something important. The truth had not ended what they were building. For the first time, it had given them a chance to build it on complete honesty. The following months passed with a quiet steadiness neither Ethan Brooks nor Ava Collins had expected. Winter faded into spring, and spring gradually gave way to summer. Life continued bringing challenges, deadlines, disappointments, and unexpected victories. But through it all, they remained part of each other's lives. There was no dramatic declaration that changed everything overnight. No grand moment that transformed friendship into something else. Instead, trust grew the same way it always had between them, slowly, honestly, and one conversation at a time. For Ethan, that change was more significant than anyone else could understand. For years, he had convinced himself that distance was protection. Keeping people away had become a habit so deeply rooted that he no longer questioned it. Yet Ava had quietly changed that. Not by demanding access to the parts of himself he kept hidden. Not by forcing him to open up. She simply remained consistent. And consistency was something Ethan had learned to value more than promises. One evening, while helping Ava organize materials for a local art exhibition, Ethan realized he was sharing stories he had never told anyone else. Childhood memories, old fears, dreams he had abandoned years earlier. The realization surprised him. For the first time since being betrayed by someone he trusted, he no longer felt the need to measure every word before speaking. Meanwhile, Ava was building something important as well. Her reputation within Denver's art community had continued to grow. Several successful exhibitions attracted new clients, and local organizations increasingly sought her work. One afternoon, she invited Ethan to see a property she had been considering. The building stood on a quiet corner street in Denver's historic arts district. Large windows faced the sidewalk. Sunlight filled the interior. The space wasn't large, but it felt alive with possibility. Ava moved slowly through the empty rooms, her hazel eyes scanning every detail. Ethan could immediately see the excitement she was trying to hide. Months later, that same building became reality. Ava Collins opened her first independent art studio and gallery. The opening day attracted students, artists, local business owners, and community members who had supported her journey over the years. Watching people enter the gallery, Ethan felt an unusual sense of pride. Not because he had built any part of it, because he had witnessed the determination required to make it happen. Many people only saw the finished gallery. Very few knew about the years of setbacks, rehabilitation, financial struggles, and uncertainty that had come before it. Ava knew, and Ethan knew. At the office, life gradually settled as well. The fallout from the prank eventually reached people beyond Ethan's department. Some coworkers quietly admitted they had crossed a line. Others offered sincere apologies. Megan, in particular, made genuine efforts to learn from her mistake. Her friendship with Ethan never returned to what it had been before, but mutual respect slowly replaced the tension. Tyler Reynolds eventually transferred to another branch office several states away. Whether the transfer was connected to what happened, Ethan never asked. Brandon remained at the company, but became noticeably quieter. For the first time, Ethan found himself uninterested in any of it. Months earlier, he would have replayed every conversation, every slight, every betrayal. Now those events felt strangely distant. Not because they no longer mattered, because they no longer controlled him. One crisp autumn afternoon, nearly a year after their first meeting, Ethan sat outside Ava's newly opened gallery. Golden leaves drifted through the streets. Pedestrians stopped occasionally to admire the artwork displayed through the windows. The city seemed peaceful. Ava sat beside him. For several moments, neither spoke. Then she smiled. "Do you ever think about that first day?" Ethan laughed softly. The community center? The world's strangest introduction. He nodded. For a moment, they both remembered how everything had begun. The deception, the misunderstanding, the uncomfortable truth that followed. Looking back, it would have been easy for that story to end differently. One bad decision from strangers could have pushed them in opposite directions. One difficult conversation could have ended everything before it truly began. Instead, both of them had chosen something harder. Honesty, understanding, patience. Ava looked toward the gallery entrance where several visitors were entering. Then she turned back toward Ethan. If I could change the way we met, I probably would. Ethan smiled. Me too. She laughed. But I wouldn't change what happened afterward. Neither would he. As the afternoon sunlight reflected through the gallery windows, both understood something important. Their relationship had never survived because of coincidence. It survived because when the truth finally appeared, they chose to keep moving toward each other instead of walking away. And in the end, that choice mattered far more than the way their story began. Before this story ends, there is one truth worth remembering. Ethan and Ava's story did not begin with kindness. It began with a mistake, a misunderstanding, and the selfish choices of other people. Yet somehow, God used that broken beginning to create something beautiful. Sometimes we pray for miracles and expect them to arrive in perfect packages. But often, God works differently. Sometimes He places the right people in our path through circumstances we do not understand. Sometimes He uses difficult moments to reveal the people who truly belong in our lives. Ethan learned that trust is not rebuilt in a single day. Ava learned that the actions of unkind people do not have to define her future. And together, they discovered that honesty, respect, and grace can overcome even the worst beginnings. Maybe someone watching today has been hurt by betrayal. Maybe someone feels forgotten, disappointed, or afraid to trust again. Remember this. God is still writing your story. The chapter you are living today is not the final chapter. The pain you carry today may become part of the testimony that helps someone else tomorrow. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs encouragement. Leave a comment below and tell us. Have you ever experienced a blessing that came from an unexpected place? And if you enjoy stories that inspire faith, hope, and second chances, don't forget to subscribe and join our community. May God bless you and your family. Bring peace to your heart, strength to your struggles, and light to every path you walk. Thank you for watching, and may the Lord watch over you until we meet again.